Welcome to the Jaron Jarvis channel. I am Jaron Jarvis. Today, I would like to introduce to you, Tales from the Water Plant. I work for a water plant that has both a hydroelectric center and a drinking water treatment center. Ever since my first day there, things have always seemed well off. As one of the lab analysts, and it being a 24-hour facility, I work some odd hours, either 7:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. or 12 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. Some parts of the plant are pretty much abandoned and almost never used anymore. Unironically, it was one hell of a stormy night when the operators and myself decided to take a late-night break for some much-needed coffee when I learned about some of the odd deaths that occurred before my time there. One of the operators, Steve, has worked there since the plant was opened, and has a strange sense of humor and wanted to tell some scary stories to help kill the time between the normal rounds and while I was waiting for my cultures to finish incubating. Steve began his story on the first day the plant opened, and some crazy preacher came to the opening ceremony to warn of the bad luck that would befall this water plant. Horror movie trope, check. Crazy preacher guy who seemingly knew something no one else knew, check. This was only the beginning of my personal horror though. Steve, this guy was dressed in head to toe with his hair dyed black and had a Bible spouting nonsense. No one even gave him a glance as he was escorted off by police. Then one day out of nowhere a 10-year-old kid drowned in one of our water tanks. No one even knows how he got in there. Now, I believe the preacher was made up. That doesn't happen in real life. Our facility is surrounded by a 20-foot fence with barbed wire wrapped around the top so tightly that it looks like a snake ready to strike on anyone unfortunate enough to make it to top without being spotted by someone looking at the Big Brother camera set up at the plant. This means that either the kid was really determined to get into the plant, or that someone with a pin brought the kid in. Steve, weirdest thing was, there wasn't a scratch on him, and no one was caught on tape with the kid. Well, I guess that took care of at least the first option. Steve continued. Steve, that one is still a mystery to us. The second death was at least easy to explain. Simply a heart attack. Poor lady dropped down onto all fours in the middle of the lab and passed away within the minute before the ambulance arrived. This one made my blood shiver. Steve said it without any empathy or real emotion to notice, but what really creeped me out was how Steve looked at me when he said it was as though his eyes were burning a hole into me, and they were the almost reptile-like without compassion. Steve, Ryan, why don't you tell us about the third death here, since after all you were the one to find the body? My head began to feel foggy as I recalled the events of how I found that poor woman's body, just floating in our lake. Her skin was torn and pale, her eyes missing, and the most horrifying smile carved into her nearly cheekless face. As I gathered my words that felt like sand slipping through my fingers with the fogginess slowly enveloping my thoughts, I was ricocheted back to reality out of my haziness by the sound of my alarm going off for me to check on my cultures. I politely excused myself, still feeling a little groggy, but when duty calls, and I would do anything to avoid that conversation. Nearly running away from that conversation and into my quiet little lab, I opened the incubator and checked on my cultures, only for something else to creep me out. In the center of all the cultures were frowny faces. The bacteria grew into perfect green and yellow speckled frowny faces staring right at me. It was almost like someone had planned this. At first, I thought it was an elaborate prank by Steve, who is a known jokester. The other stories he told tonight were probably just a way to get me riled up to scare me more with his little joke. I laughed to myself and went to find the real cultures only to find that they were missing. I checked the frowny faces again and confirmed it was my handwriting on the clear plastic coverings. Thinking I somehow just messed up the cultures myself, I went to make up new ones, but remember those abandoned parts I mentioned? Well, to get more egg I have to go through one of them. The door squeaked open to reveal 4 giant empty tanks shrouded in darkness with nothing but the small sparks of luminescence from the rising thunderstorm outside and small beam of my flashlight just barely piercing it. Control panels once used to control the outflow valves were covered in dust and webs with their dim green and red barely clinging to life. This empty storage vessel always creeps me out. Its empty halls and whining its machines echoing throughout it make it sound like a beast calling out in pain for any passers to come and help it out of its misery. To say the least, a horrifying place to be alone at in the middle of the night armed to the teeth with only a flashlight. Another horror trope, check. Walking through the empty vestibule, something caught my eye between two old sets of lockers on the back wall. A fishbowl. Nothing particularly scary about a fishbowl, except that it wasn't there earlier that day. Nor has there ever been a fishbowl there. I stopped and checked it out, but then something else got my attention. One of the empty tanks was emitting a gurgling sound. Shining the flashlight into the large tank, a small pipe in the center was spouting water and filling the tank. That's when I saw the hand. A hand was coming out of the pipe, and pretty soon an entire arm was breaking out of the pipe. I was frozen. I wiped my eyes. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. Barely thinking, I dropped the flashlight, breaking the only light I had, and ran to the control panel. Now with no light, I was slamming all the buttons on the control panel like a mad organist playing his last tune. "Where is the fucking tank close button?" I yelled. Finally hitting every button I could, the whirring of the tank gates started, and arm now peeking out as almost a shoulder was being locked away. Panting, and heart racing, I thought I was losing my mind. "What the hell are you doing, Ryan?" My heart dropped as I looked over, but thankfully it was just Steve and a few others with flashlights running to me looking pissed off. A fucking arm. An arm. I barely managed to stammer out. Steve looked pensive, as if something I said triggered a memory for him. "Steve, an arm? Did you just say an arm?" He seemed a little shocked at first as well, but his look said it all. He calmed down and asked the others to leave. He set up a few lanterns from the other room and grabbed a chair for me. Steve reopened the tank gate despite me asking him not to. "Steve, well, there sure is water in there, but no arm, Ryan. I guess you finally saw him, or thankfully, only part of him." With that, he left the room and I followed, nearly in tears and trembling as I struggled to walk. Steve took me into his office and sat me down, gave me a cold glass of water. He informed me he was looking at Big Brother when he saw my light go out suddenly, so he came to me. I took to the lab and showed him the frowny faces on my cultures, but there was a new one in a bank petri dish. A smiley face. After Steve saw that, he began to fill me in on what else lurks in the shadows of the plant.